Millionaire grabs janitor's throat in parking lot, unaware the black woman had military past that would end him. Welcome, my beautiful family of truth seekers. Welcome to a tale that will shatter your assumptions and expose the raw power hidden in plain sight. In a world obsessed with appearances, we often miss the silent battles fought, the dormant strengths waiting to be awakened. Tonight, we unearth a story about a man who wielded power like a weapon and a woman he dismissed as nothing, until the concrete labyrinth of a parking garage became the arena for a clash that would redefine both their destinies. Meet Alara Vance. To the world, she was just another shadow, a silent guardian of the forgotten spaces in the glittering corporate towers. Her uniform, faded and practical, was her camouflage, allowing her to blend, to be invisible. But beneath that unassuming exterior beat the heart of a survivor, a mind meticulously trained, eyes that had seen far more than fluorescent lights and dusty corners. Every deliberate movement, every scrub of her brush was a ritual, a silent pact with the past she desperately tried to keep buried. This quiet discipline wasn't born in a janitorial academy. It was forged in fire, in a life where precision meant survival and vigilance was a second skin. Her deepest desire? To remain unseen, to keep the ghosts of old battles from ever finding her again. And then there was Alaric Thorne. From his penthouse office, high above the city's hum, Alaric saw the world as his personal chessboard. Every pawn, every knight, every queen existed to serve his relentless ambition. He wasn't just wealthy, he was power personified, his empire built on a foundation of ruthless efficiency and an unshakable belief in his own untouchable status. A 5-minute delay from his driver was not merely an inconvenience, it was an act of cosmic defiance, an insult to his meticulously ordered universe. He saw people as disposable, tools to be used or discarded. And today, the universe, in its insolence, was about to meet the full, unbridled force of Alaric Thorne's wrath. What happens when these two disparate worlds collide, when the seemingly weak are confronted by unchecked arrogance? Prepare yourselves, because the silence of the night is about to be shattered, and the true nature of power is about to be violently unmasked. The screech of tires tore through Alara's carefully constructed bubble of routine. Alaric's obsidian sedan skidded to a halt, too close, too fast. He erupted from the vehicle, a storm of fury unleashed. His predatory gaze instantly locked onto Alara's cleaning cart, momentarily obstructing his path. Alaric's voice, booming, full of contempt, shouted, "Are you deaf, woman? Move that wretched cart. I don't have all day for your imbecilic incompetence." "I am almost finished, sir," Alara replied. Her composure, a stark refusal to cower, ignited something primal in him. "A moment?" he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "My time is worth more than your entire insignificant existence." Before she could even register his intent, his hand shot out, not at the cart, but directly at her. It clamped around her throat, a brutal act of dominance, crushing her windpipe. The air instantly hitched in her lungs. But in her eyes, Alaric saw no fear, no submission. Instead, he met a gaze that burned with a terrifying ancient fire. A silent war had just been declared, not in the quiet hum of the garage, but in the terrifying, immediate space between them. For Alaric, it was a display of utter power. For Alara, it was a trigger, tearing open old wounds and unleashing a force he couldn't possibly comprehend. He thought he had grabbed a janitor's throat. He had, in fact, just awakened a ghost. That brief, violent encounter in the parking garage wasn't just an incident, it was an earthquake. For Alaric Thorne, it was a moment of fleeting triumph, quickly overshadowed by a chilling, unshakable unease. For Alara Vance, it was the snapping of a carefully constructed dam, threatening to unleash a torrent of suppressed instincts and forgotten horrors. The repercussions, however, were just beginning. Alaric's grip on Alara's throat lasted mere seconds, but its imprint was searing. He released her abruptly, as if burned, his own breath catching. Alara stumbled back, massaging her neck, her eyes still holding that unsettling, unblinking intensity. Alara shouted, "Watch where you're going next time, woman!" Then he sped out of the garage, the roar of his engine a desperate attempt to drown out the lingering image of her gaze, to erase the uncomfortable prickle that he had not, in fact, asserted dominance, but provoked something ancient and dangerous. He rationalized it away, just an overreaction, a minor incident with an inconsequential employee. His world couldn't be challenged by a janitor. The thought itself was absurd. Yet the unease gnawed at him. Alara stood motionless, the burning sensation in her throat a cruel echo of a past she'd fought desperately to bury. Her hands clenched, then unclenched, a silent battle raging within. Every fiber of her being screamed for retaliation, for the swift, decisive action that had once been her second nature. The years of discipline, of suppressing the warrior beneath the civilian, threatened to unravel. She fought against the surge of adrenaline, against the vivid flash of combat scenarios that flickered behind her eyes. Not here, not now. The instinct to strike, to neutralize the threat was overwhelming, but the consequences, the loss of this quiet, safe life, held her back. She had to resist the easy path, the brutal efficiency she was trained for. But the seed of something else, something cold and strategic, had been planted. The desire for invisibility had been replaced by a growing resolve for quiet, meticulously planned retribution. Back in his opulent office, Alaric was still trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease when his assistant, Chloe, a perpetually flustered young woman, timidly knocked. Chloe, in a nervous voice, hushed, "Mr. Thorne, security just called. They'd like you to come down. Something about an incident." Alaric shockingly asked, "An incident? With whom?" "The janitor, Alara, and a complaint from one of the night shift supervisors who reviewed the camera footage." The bottom dropped out of Alaric's stomach. This wasn't going away. A cold dread began to coil. He rose, forcing a look of indignant authority as he headed towards the elevators, his mind racing for a way to dismiss this nuisance. But deep down, he knew. The ghost he thought he'd provoked was now stirring. When Alaric arrived at the security office, the air was thick with an oppressive stillness. And there she was. Alara sat on a hard plastic chair, her back ramrod straight, her hands clasped calmly in her lap. Her uniform, once again, made her seem almost invisible, yet Alara couldn't tear his eyes from her. Her presence filled the small room, a silent accusation. Officer Miller, with a professional voice, gruffed, "Mr. Thorne, Ms. Vance, thank you for coming. We just need to get your statements regarding the incident in the parking garage." Alara simply nodded, her gaze neutral, offering nothing. Alaric, bristling with indignation, took the chair furthest from her, a chasm of unspoken conflict between them. The forced proximity was unbearable. Each breath Alara took a silent challenge. Each glance Alara gave her a flicker of frustrated contempt. They were trapped, two opposing forces in a neutral zone, their raw emotions slowly beginning to seep through the professional facade. The quiet battle had now moved from the dark corners of the garage to the stark light of the security office. The air in that security office wasn't just thick, it was charged, heavy with unspoken accusations and suppressed histories. Officer Miller, a man of procedure, was about to unwittingly unleash a truth far more profound than a simple workplace altercation. He was about to ask Alara Vance, and in her quiet words, and in a startling, almost subliminal moment, Alaric Thorne would get his first terrifying glimpse of the ghost he had dared to provoke. Officer Miller's voice, professional and detached, said, So, Miss Vance, can you describe what happened from your perspective? Ilara took a slow, deliberate breath. Her gaze flickered to Alaric for a fraction of a second, a look so neutral it was almost unsettling, before settling on a nondescript spot on the wall behind Miller. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured, devoid of dramatics. Ilara's quiet, unwavering replied, "I was cleaning, as usual. Mr. Thorne arrived, agitated about his driver. He then approached my cart, and then me." She paused, her voice unwavering, but a subtle tremor in her left hand, now resting on her knee, betrayed a deeper struggle. It was a minuscule detail, yet a crack in her carefully constructed facade, a hint of the hurricane raging beneath her placid surface. Alaric, impatiently drumming his fingers on the table, seemed oblivious to this minor tell. He just wanted this tedious charade to be over. Just then a harsh, unexpected clang echoed from the hallway outside, a janitor's bucket being dropped, sending a sharp, metallic reverberation through the office. The sound wasn't just a noise, it was a detonation. Ilara's head snapped towards the sound, her body instantly tensing, eyes narrowing, posture shifting minutely into something defensive, almost predatory. It was a movement so swift, so instinctive, so utterly alien to a janitor, it bordered on the supernatural. For a fleeting second, the sterile office dissolved. Ilara was back in a dusty, sun-baked landscape, the clang of the bucket transforming into the sharp, metallic crack of a bullet casing hitting the ground. She saw the familiar faces of her unit, heard urgent whispers, felt the unforgiving weight of her gear. The suddenness, the unexpected threat, the need for immediate, decisive action, it all flooded back in a dizzying, terrifying wave. Her breath hitched. When the office snapped back into focus, she was still sitting, but the subtle tremor in her hand was now more pronounced. Alaric, who had been impatiently drumming his fingers, froze. He hadn't seen the memory, but he'd seen her reaction. The sharp, almost violent focus in her eyes, the instantaneous physical shift. It wasn't the startled jump of a civilian. It was the instinct of someone trained for conflict, for survival. A cold knot formed in his stomach. This woman, the quiet janitor he'd so easily dismissed, was not what she seemed. The realization was unsettling, a dark premonition that something far more complex than a mere assault charge was at play. Officer Miller, seemingly oblivious to the unspoken exchange that had just passed like an electric current between Ilara and Alaric, continued to take down notes, his pen scratching against paper. The brief, jarring moment had passed, but its impression lingered, a chill clinging to the air. Ilara, feeling Alaric's gaze, subtly straightened, forcing her breathing back into its quiet rhythm. She focused on a faded picture on Miller's desk, a smiling young girl holding a fishing rod, dwarfed by a huge grinning fish. My daughter, first time she ever reeled one in herself. Look at her grip, though, strong, like she knows what she's doing. Miller looked up, surprised but pleased. He beamed, pointing to a detail. Alaric, still processing Ilara's earlier, almost violent response to the clang, found his eyes drawn to the picture too. He saw the genuine, unforced warmth in Ilara's fleeting smile, a humanity that starkly contradicted the icy precision he'd witnessed moments before. A strange, uncomfortable flicker of regret stirred within him. "She looks proud," Alaric found himself saying, the words escaping before he could censor them, a surprising gentleness in his tone. Ilara met his gaze then, and for the first time there was no hostility, no judgment, only a shared, silent acknowledgment of something universal. It was a fleeting truce, a fragile thread woven between them by a child's triumph. A tiny, almost invisible crack in the wall of their conflict, where a sliver of peace, even understanding, seemed possible. The air in the room, for just a breath, felt a little less suffocating. For a second, the millionaire and the janitor ceased to exist. There were just two people sharing a simple, human moment. But fragile moments, like whispers in a storm, are easily shattered, and the machine was about to play its part.
The quiet truce was about to be obliterated by the cold, unforgiving lens of truth. Officer Miller, seemingly oblivious to the unspoken exchange that had just passed like an electric current between Ilara and Alaric, continued to take down notes, his pen scratching against paper. The brief jarring moment had passed, but its impression lingered, a chill clinging to the air. Ilara, feeling Alaric's gaze, subtly straightened, forcing her breathing back into its quiet rhythm. She focused on a faded picture on Miller's desk, a smiling young girl holding a fishing rod, dwarfed by a huge, grinning fish. My daughter. First time she ever reeled one in herself. Look at her grip, though, strong, like she knows what she's doing. Miller looked up, surprised but pleased. He beamed, pointing to a detail. Alaric, still processing Ilara's earlier, almost violent response to the clang, found his eyes drawn to the picture too. He saw the genuine, unforced warmth in Ilara's fleeting smile, a humanity that starkly contradicted the icy precision he'd witnessed moments before. A strange, uncomfortable flicker of regret stirred within him. "She looks proud," Alaric found himself saying, the words escaping before he could censor them, a surprising gentleness in his tone. Ilara met his gaze then, and for the first time there was no hostility, no judgment, only a shared, silent acknowledgment of something universal. It was a fleeting truce, a fragile thread woven between them by a child's triumph, a tiny, almost invisible crack in the wall of their conflict, where a sliver of peace, even understanding, seemed possible. The air in the room, for just a breath, felt a little less suffocating. For a second, the millionaire and the janitor ceased to exist. There were just two people sharing a simple human moment. But fragile moments, like whispers in a storm, are easily shattered. And the machine was about to play its part. The quiet truce was about to be obliterated by the cold, unforgiving lens of truth.
We witnessed a fleeting truce, a whisper of humanity in the midst of brewing conflict. But in every emotional story, there's often a crucible moment where everything breaks apart, where the last vestiges of illusion are stripped away, and the true nature of individuals is laid bare. For Alaric Thorne and Ilara Vance, that moment arrived, brought by the unforgiving lens of a security camera. The brief, unexpected truce shattered with the sterile click of a mouse. Officer Miller, with a mundane efficiency that belied the monumental impact of his action, loaded the security footage onto a large monitor. The harsh, unflinching glow filled the small office, bathing Alaric and Ilara in its stark, unforgiving light. There it was, the pixelated truth. Alaric, agitated, his body language bristling with arrogance, shouting, then the unmistakable lunge, his hand clamping around Ilara's throat. The image, stark and unforgiving, played in agonizing slow motion, a silent accusation echoing through the room. Alaric watched, his face draining of color. The fleeting regret he'd felt moments before, replaced by a tidal wave of shame, humiliation, and an incandescent, desperate rage. He saw himself, a brute, a bully, captured for all to see. The small moment of shared humanity over the fishing photo evaporated, replaced by the burning humiliation of public exposure. He couldn't stand it. This wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror, reflecting his ugliest self, broadcast for the world he so meticulously controlled. Alaric's voice, roaring, desperate, trying to switch off the monitor. "This is ridiculous. This is a setup. She provoked me. You think I would just do that to some nobody janitor?" He spun on Ilara, his eyes blazing with a desperate, self-preserving fury. "You planned this, didn't you? You wanted to make a scene, to shake me down." His words, laced with venom and a profound sense of betrayal, cut through the air like a knife. Ilara, who had watched the footage with a grim, emotionless detachment, flinched, not from fear, but from the sudden, vicious unfairness of his accusation. Her brief, almost imperceptible softening towards him vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, resolute clarity. Alara, in a flat, clinical voice, said, "I merely stated what happened. The camera shows the rest." Her simple, factual statement, delivered with an almost clinical detachment, seemed to enrage him further, igniting the dying embers of his arrogant pride. Alaric's voice, now spitting with contempt, fired, "You think you can just blackmail me, Alara? You think I don't know who you are, what you are? A grunt, a nobody." The cruel words, meant to diminish her, to break her, instead solidified her resolve. They were not insults, they were a battle cry. The fragile connection, built on a child's smile, had not only broken, but had been pulverized into dust, leaving behind a chasm of resentment and a renewed, steely determination. She looked at him then, not with anger, but with the cold, assessing gaze of a strategist. The time for resistance, for anonymity, was over. The game had changed. Victor Thorne, in his blind fury and desperate denial, had not only ensured his own downfall, but had irrevocably activated the hidden warrior within Alara Vance. The destruction of that fragile bond was absolute. Now each must face the consequences of that shattering moment alone, and only one was truly prepared for the battle to come. The battle began in a parking lot, escalated in a security office, and now it was about to reach its devastating crescendo. For Alaric Thorne, the path ahead was one of unexpected loss, a consequence meticulously carved by his own arrogance. For Alara Vance, it was the rediscovery of purpose, the forging of a new identity from the ashes of her suppressed past. This is the story of how a nobody janitor became the architect of justice, and how a titan learned too late the true cost of underestimation. In the days and weeks that followed, the repercussions hit Alaric Thorne with a force he hadn't anticipated, an unstoppable avalanche triggered by a single brutal act. A formal complaint was filed, not just by Officer Miller, but by Alara herself. A concise, clinically detailed account that left no room for his bluster or convenient denials. His high-powered lawyers, accustomed to sweeping away minor inconveniences with hefty settlements, found themselves grappling with damning security footage and an unyielding victim who refused to be bought off. Board members at Thorne Enterprises, wary of bad press, shareholder dissent, and the escalating threat of lawsuits, began to distance themselves. Their carefully cultivated smiles, once so eager to bask in Alaric's reflected glory, were replaced by cold, calculating stares. Alaric paced his opulent penthouse, a caged lion, the gilded walls of his empire suddenly feeling suffocatingly constricting. He could fight this, deny, obfuscate, but the cost was mounting, not just financially, but to his meticulously crafted public image. He saw Alara's face in his mind, not the meek janitor, but the woman with eyes that had seen battle, eyes that held an unwavering, terrifying resolve. He faced a bitter choice: continue his aggressive denial, which threatened to unravel his entire public image, or offer a concession, a settlement, to make her disappear. But even the thought of capitulating to a nobody janitor chafed at his immense pride, making the choice a bitter, almost unbearable pill to swallow. His reputation, his very identity as an unyielding titan, hung in the balance. Alara, meanwhile, moved with a renewed sense of purpose. The shattered encounter had stripped away the last vestiges of her desire for invisibility. The pain of Alaric's accusation, his cruel words, had been a catalyst, reigniting a fire she thought long extinguished. She spent hours in quiet contemplation, reviewing files, making calls, her old military network, dormant for years, now softly humming back to life. She wasn't seeking revenge in the conventional sense, not a physical confrontation, but justice, precise, strategic, and irrefutable. The legal route was a start, but she knew his kind. They bought their way out. Alara's campaign was not about money, it was about balance, about ensuring that arrogant power did not crush the vulnerable without consequence. She decided not to just pursue the assault complaint, but to delve deeper, using the same meticulous intelligence and strategic thinking she'd once applied to combat missions. Her past, once a burden she sought to hide, was now her sharpest weapon, wielded with a terrifying calmness. The quiet janitor was gone, replaced by a ghost of the soldier she once was, ready to execute a meticulous, non-violent, but utterly devastating campaign. Weeks bled into months. The incident in the parking garage became the catalyst for Alaric Thorne's spectacular downfall. Ilara, using her meticulously re-engaged network of contacts, former intelligence assets, investigative journalists she subtly guided, and whistleblowers emboldened by her anonymity, hadn't just pursued the assault complaint. She had quietly, surgically exposed a pattern of corporate malfeasance, egregious unethical business practices, and systematic intimidation that had festered beneath Alaric's carefully polished facade for years. The evidence, presented anonymously but with irrefutable precision, drew the attention of regulatory bodies, then investigative journalists, and finally federal prosecutors. One by one, his carefully constructed empire began to unravel. Board members, facing their own legal repercussions, swiftly voted him out. His assets were frozen, his reputation in tatters, and the once unyielding titan found himself facing not just civil suits, but the looming threat of criminal charges. He was stripped bare, left with nothing but the echo of his own arrogance. One crisp autumn morning, Alaric, a shadow of his former self, sat hunched in a crowded courthouse waiting room, awaiting yet another hearing that would chip away at what little remained of his empire. He caught a glimpse of himself in the reflective glass of a trophy case, a man whose tailored suit now hung loose, his eyes hollowed by stress, his posture defeated. The air was thick with the hushed murmurs of lawyers and plaintiffs. Then the double doors swung open, and Ilara Vance walked in. She wasn't in her janitor's uniform. She wore a simple, well-fitting charcoal suit that subtly emphasized the lean strength of her frame. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was softer, framing a face that still held vigilance, but now also a profound sense of peace. Their eyes met across the room, and for Alaric it was a chilling echo of that day in the parking lot. The same unblinking intensity, but now devoid of anger, replaced by a quiet, unwavering confidence. He saw not a janitor, but a force. A woman who had meticulously dismantled his world not with a weapon, but with intellect, strategy, and an unbreakable will. She gave him no triumphant smile, no condescending nod, just a steady, knowing look that communicated a truth more devastating than any shouted accusation. He had gravely underestimated her, and the cost was everything. One crisp autumn morning, Alaric, a shadow of his former self, sat hunched in a crowded courthouse waiting room, awaiting yet another hearing that would chip away at what little remained of his empire. He caught a glimpse of himself in the reflective glass of a trophy case, a man whose tailored suit now hung loose, his eyes hollowed by stress, his posture defeated. The air was thick with the hushed murmurs of lawyers and plaintiffs. Then the double doors swung open, and Ilara Vance walked in. She wasn't in her janitor's uniform. She wore a simple, well-fitting charcoal suit that subtly emphasized the lean strength of her frame. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was softer, framing a face that still held vigilance, but now also a profound sense of peace. Their eyes met across the room, and for Alaric it was a chilling echo of that day in the parking lot. The same unblinking intensity, but now devoid of anger, replaced by a quiet, unwavering confidence. He saw not a janitor, but a force. A woman who had meticulously dismantled his world not with a weapon, but with intellect, strategy, and an unbreakable will. She gave him no triumphant smile, no condescending nod, just a steady, knowing look that communicated a truth more devastating than any.
He had gravely underestimated her, and the cost was everything.
Ilara walked past him without a word, her stride purposeful, heading towards her own legal team. She was no longer seeking anonymity. She had found a new path, leveraging her unique skills and insights to advocate for others, working with a nonprofit dedicated to exposing corporate abuses against vulnerable employees. The scars of her past were still there, but they no longer defined her as a victim. They were the etchings of a survivor, a strategist, a quiet warrior who had finally found her true purpose. The parking lot incident hadn't ended her, it had freed her. As Alaric was called into the courtroom, facing the grim reality of his shattered life, Ilara felt a profound sense of completion. Justice, for her, was not about revenge, but about balance, about the powerful facing consequences, and the underestimated finding their voice, their power, and ultimately a love for the empowered self they had become. Wow, what an ending! Ilara found her love at last not in a romantic partner, but in the rediscovery of her own strength, her purpose, and the unexpected justice she carved out. Alaric faced a devastating, unexpected loss, a direct consequence of his actions, a downfall orchestrated by the very person he deemed a nobody. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey, my beautiful family. If this story touched you, if it made you rethink assumptions about people, or if you simply enjoyed the ride, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. And remember, sometimes the quietest people hold the greatest power.